Hi, Mohan.
Hi Louise, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. So today we are talking about how to build a messaging strategy that get replies, right? This is a big subject because some people are getting ghosted when they goes on prospecting, etc. I'm Eloise. I'm partnerships manager at a growth machine. I run this kind of webinars with experts every week, actually. And today I'm super happy to have Mohan by my side for this great subject about messaging and copywriting. And yeah, for the one who doesn't know me or La Growth Machine, La Growth Machine is a sales automation tool, prospecting tool, which giving you the ability of building your list, enrich leads, and just build all your sequence of outbound, and then follow and track the performance. Today we are really focusing on messaging and Moan, maybe you're the expert about these topics. I can let you introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, thanks. Yeah, so my name is Mohan. I'm the founder of Spring Drive. We are an outbound agency helping B2B companies basically book more pipelines, so more sales meetings coming in, so you can close more deals, grow, and scale from there. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want to just if we want to just kick off and get straight into it, or
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Just for the people who are here, guys, you have a chat little button just on the sidebar. So I will say hi in the chat just to launch it, but just see this hour with Moana has a free hour of consulting, so you don't have to be shy. You can ask all your question about what you are challenge, what you are facing, what are your challenges, about copywriting, messaging framework, a strategy, and yeah, see that as a really 1 hour. We are a few people here today, so let's take it in as an opportunity.
Super, thank you. So I'll begin by saying firstly what is messaging strategy. What do we mean by messaging strategy? And I'm actually more inclined these days to refer to it as resonance strategy, which I'll explain a little bit later on. But essentially, we're coming up with the idea of what does it mean to put together a message which is going to get someone to be interested enough to reply some way positively, so that we can bring them down our sales funnel. One key distinction I would make is that messaging strategy is not the same thing as copywriting. Copywriting is a facet, it's a factor of messaging strategy, but it's not everything that we include in messaging
Yeah,
strategy.
right.
We'll go through some of these points today. I think I think the first thing that I will say is that one thing, and this is more of a concept, but it's so critical, I think, to putting together good messages, is the idea of competition and of competitiveness. Because I think what I see a lot from companies that reach out to me, show me their messages, and sort of say, well, why aren't we getting results? They'll often cite the correct structures that are important when we think about putting together effective or good messages. Are you mentioning a pain? Do you have some social proof? Have you written a value proposition? Do you have a CTA, and so on and so forth? The problem is that a lot of the time, what these companies are doing is they're evaluating how good that email or that LinkedIn message looks like in a silo. So
Mhm.
they're looking at those boxes of pain, of social proof, etc., and saying, well, I've ticked these boxes. Why am I not getting lots of people responding and saying, hey, I'm interested? And fundamentally, one of the things I see a lot is that it's because those messages, whilst they are structurally sound, they are not competitive. You have to remember that what we're doing in sales essentially is it's something akin to a sport, because when you send a message, whether it's an email or a LinkedIn message, or even picking up the phone and having a conversation, that message is competing with the plethora of competition from other similar companies reaching out to that ICP. And so fundamentally, what people have to begin with is a bit of a mindset shift when they're thinking about their message, not asking the questions, does it hit the right things that I've been reading about online, but asking specifically, does this message look competitive in the environment it's going to land in? So in a LinkedIn messaging feed or in an email inbox, my competitors, what are they probably saying to these people? What are they probably offering? And is mine actually, even if it looks sound from a structural perspective, you need to rethink that message. So that's the first, I think, thing that people need to begin with. And that's really actually fundamental to the entire outbound and pipeline building process. Because ultimately, people receive your message. They don't care how you put it together. They don't care really about how good you think you are or how excited you are about your tool. They have either looked at your message and gone, wow, this is really great. I hardly ever get a message like this. Or they go, I see this all the time. I'm not interested. So that's really what you need to be working on. This leads to, I think, the first tenet that I put out in this sort of messaging and resonance strategy, which is the concept of balance theory. And this is very, very similar to what we're thinking about competitiveness. But the first thing that teams should be doing is brainstorming their ICP and specifically, what are they probably already hearing a lot of? This is something that they should be doing as actively as an exercise before you even think about what we put in an email. Asking those questions, and in particular thinking about how crowded is your market. If you are a company that is reaching out, for example, to VPs of sales at SaaS companies in the US, that's a crowded market. They're getting a lot of emails, they're getting a lot of LinkedIn messages. So you should already know, just by properly understanding the market landscape of your ICP, we have a higher threshold to generate pipeline here than, for example, if we had a product that was selling into basically a less crowded market, whatever that, pharmacists in the Netherlands. Maybe they get lots of cold emails, I don't know, but probably fewer than, let's say, the ICP I mentioned. So firstly is to think about that. Is it crowded? And if so, is that threshold high? And then what we then want to be doing is looking at our assets as a company. So we need to think about actually how unique is our product or service. And that has to be a question that you need to remove a little bit of emotion from, because everyone thinks their product and service is incredible and we're one of one and no one does what we do. Chances are there's a lot of competition for what you do, particularly today. And you have to ask yourself, how unique is this? Then you have to say, okay, well, maybe we are unique, maybe we aren't in our actual offering, but do we have unique social proof? And once again, we want to ask those questions of, not what do we feel is really cool and different, but genuinely, is this different to what others are saying? And we're going to go down a list there of various kind of assets that we can have, lead magnets and so on, to figure out in terms of our balance. Where are we weak? Where are we strong? Again, not in a silo. If we look at our social proof and say we have social proof, that doesn't mean you have strength in your social proof. You have to ask the question, which is a bit more subtle and a bit more nuanced. Is our social proof actually unique and different, or much stronger than what this ICP is used to hearing? And that's a very different question to, do we have social proof? So balance theory is about balancing those different assets first and understanding where to lean on. So what I want to go through today is some of what those facets are and some of the misnomers around them. I think there's a lot of, I think, looking at things perhaps a little bit too basically. And I think on the other end of the scale with things like triggers and personalization, sometimes going a bit too far and losing the wood for the trees and sending out some really interesting looking stuff, but maybe things that aren't going to resonate with with your ICP. So the first thing I'll mention, and I've spoken about this topic before, but I still see this done all the time, is the difference between pains and problems when we're reaching out to an ICP, to a decision maker. Fundamentally, the difference is actually quite simple. Problems are general problems that a company has, and pains are the specific day-to-day frustrations the decision maker has in trying to fix those problems. So a good example, I think, in the lead gen space, which is everyone's probably very familiar with this, is sending a company an email that says, do you need more leads? Do you need more meetings? That's not a pain. Or are you struggling to get more leads or struggling to get more meetings? That's not a pain. That's actually a problem that the company has. The pain might be something along the lines of, well, the head of sales has, let's say we're reaching out to head of sales, we've hired 3 SDRs in the 6 months, but none of them are good enough. And basically, we can't find out how to actually hire the best SDRs that are going to stay over the long term and book meetings. That's a frustration that that decision maker is having to fix the problem of not enough pipeline, right? And that's really crucial. Again, link it back to balance theory. A lot of, excuse me, a lot of the pain, I like to put it in quotes actually, the pain statements that go out there in emails are actually very trite. They're actually very basic. And oftentimes, the reason why it's important to think about this is because every sentence in your email and your LinkedIn message matters. Because not only can it not have a positive effect, it can have a negative effect. So very often, and you may have seen this yourself, Louise, I know I've seen this. Sometimes I get an email and the first sentence, because it's such a generic kind of sentence, I already get an impression they want from me, and I don't even bother reading the rest of the email because I get so many of it. Are you struggling to do? I'm not. I know you. I'm not interested. So there's an element of when we're thinking about that pain problem statements. Why is it important? It's not just about for the sake of being more interesting. It's firstly resonating more because we're saying something that's more specific, but then also because we want to try and break the pattern that decision maker used to, which is hearing a message which is actually very basic, and they're hearing a lot of times already. Part of that, I would say, by the way, as well, I think a lot of this pain data is kind of dead, if I'm really honest with you. But I think it's because of what I've just mentioned, which is that 90% of pain data is actually problem data. And that problem data is so easily accessible now. And most people in your industry will probably know it, that you're basically just kind of wasting your time by saying it in the first place. One thing when we think about balance theory that's important to remember is you don't have to say everything just because you have it available to you to say. And again, I think this is why structured thinking can kind of mislead teams sometimes. I think it's really good if you're just LinkedIn outreach to think about what does a good structure look like. But to be a bit more sophisticated and you think about balance theory, sometimes you might find actually it's better to not have a pain statement or a problem statement, depending on that balance and what data you actually have. And part of that also is then using things in a more sophisticated way. So one way that you can use pain data, if you want to break pattern a little bit, but use it a bit more in a nuanced way, is to rather than have a pain statement, because you as a company might recognize, look, we don't have great pain data. It's actually pretty generic. That's kind of what we're working with. But we can weave that perhaps into good social proof that we have. So a great example of doing that in an outreach message is rather than having a problem statement, which is generic and maybe turns the prospect off because it signals to them what you're about and they're not interested, you begin with a really strong social proof statement, something like a really, really similar company with a really great result that you got them, but weaved into that sentence is the thing that they were dealing with that made them need what you offer. So you could say something like, we helped another similar kind of company, brand name, who were struggling to get their reply rates up. And then you go, and it's a social proof statement. It's not there's no pain statement, so to speak, in that email or in that message, but you've woven it into that social proof. So you can also be more sophisticated as well. And again, to make your emails or your LinkedIn messages just that bit more differentiated and a bit more succinct. Talking a little bit about the social proof side here as well. I think this is also a part where we're moving on, I think, slightly from over the last year or so, 2 years now, even more than that. We've been talking a lot about social proof that is, I think, quite generically matched. So sometimes you'll have companies, they're reaching out to recruitment firms, and the social proof will be something along the lines of, we have helped recruitment firms like you, and then a very generic results statement. The problem with this, again, and it comes back to what I said at the very start, is you're in a competitive environment. And this is now, we've moved on. It's become too trite. And so one of the ways you want to combat that is start thinking about social proof, again, in a much more sophisticated way. And the way we do that is with enhanced specificity. So instead of just saying, okay, let's take that example again of the recruitment firm. Instead of just saying, we help a recruitment firms like you, and, we helped a recruitment firm like you do with some numbers, we can actually say, let's be more specific. And we're targeting, let's say, the sales director at a recruitment firm that's based in Europe, with under 20 employees. We can say, actually, we had a similar conversation with another head of sales who was struggling because, and then you actually want to use that social proof intelligently. what is something that a recruitment firm with under 20 employees might have as a specific need or pain because of their company size, if that's relevant here, and then how your solution, service, product solved that. And again, it comes back to the idea of, can we frame the assets that we have in a way that is more resonant to the prospect? And resonant is entirely relative concept because it's based on the competitive environment in which you're operating. 4 or 5 years ago, you reach out to companies and say just things like, we also help, or we help to, and just using generic kind of personalization of the industry type and so on, really effective. But we've just moved on from it. And I think companies they have to sort of be on top of this and be thinking in a much more faster cycles of how to be testing their outreach and actually changing up messaging, because it just moves a lot quicker today, particularly obviously with AI and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think on social media, that's my main point there, right? To start being, and really what ties into this is fundamentally this concept of understanding specificity, right? I read an email recently actually where the thrust of the value proposition, I think it was about time tracking software. And the thrust of the proposition was basically written as, we help with the type of companies with time tracking. But there was no data or anything in that about, what do you mean by we help? How do you help? What is it that you're doing? Is there a specific part of time tracking or time tracking analytics or whatever it is for this particular ICP that you help with? Are you helping with, making sure that you can track multiple, workers in various remote offices automatically through fingerprinting? Whatever it is, like, what is the specificity that's going to make that person say, oh, that sounds interesting, as opposed to, here's another generic offer I'm getting about, about time tracking generally. So specificity, I think, is really fundamental. I think it's really hard as well. Companies, I find that it's more of a mental barrier. I think sometimes, and it's almost sometimes asking the question how as many times as you can. So if you write an email and you see certain sentences, they're like, we help this, or like, you must be struggling with this. Ask yourself the question, how are they struggling with this? How can we help you? How is it that we help you with this? And usually there's something underneath that, which is more specific, and which if you matched your list correctly, would be much more resonant than those more kind of generalized sentences of like, we can help you, and so on. The other well is that when we think about messaging generally, the psychology of people is really, really fundamental to whether or not people reply to you, whether or not people want to read your message. And the first thing that I always impress upon people is that people don't actually tend, when they get emails, to read emails all the way through and then decide how they feel about it. This is actually, I think, why, generally speaking, very, very short messages often do better, just because you give yourself the chance to get the full message actually read through. But often what people do is they scan the message, subconsciously, for things that tell them what it is, because no one can be bothered to read through long messages, right? All of our attention spans have been shot by, LinkedIn videos, Instagram reels, whatever you want to call it, right? So the idea is, what people are doing is they're not going to read it, they're going to scan it. And one concept I talk about a lot is this idea of pop theory. And pop theory basically is the idea that when you're looking at your message, one of the things you should ask yourself is, are there any phrases, are there any words here that pop out in a positive or a negative way? I mean, you want to be more concerned about those negative pops, and which would basically signal to the prospect that you shouldn't continue reading. Or, as I say, if it's positive, that you should. So a good example is, I see this all the time with SEO companies, where, because SEO is like always in capitals, right? Like capital SEO. And I see this a lot as well. Every time I get a message that's like, however long it is, the word SEO pops out. You just see it like that. And as soon as I do this a lot, I know other people do it as well. As soon as you see that word, you're like, no, I'm not interested. Because I know what it is. You're trying to sell me SEO. I don't care. But interestingly, what is SEO really about? It's about getting more traffic to your website, to your offer. And so if there was no mention of SEO in an email, but it was just talking about how they can get more traffic to my website, which would lead to more conversions and sales, including that negative pop word, right? You're not giving yourself the chance to start the conversation, right? To then go on and bring um, that prospect down the pipeline. This also works, as I say, in the positive way, right? So if you can think of, and I'll talk about some good examples in a second, if you can think of ways to create positive pops where someone scans the email or the LinkedIn message and they see something that goes, oh, how do you know this, or whatever it might be, I better read this through. So good examples could be things like mentioning a colleague's name. I think this is a really good one, because if you are in particularly in office-based companies where you're maybe talking about someone who's literally right, like across from them or in the building, right, that they know. But even in remote offices where people are working closely together, if you mention someone that they know, there's always a chance they're going to want to read that, because it's like, how do you know this person? And there's a sense of, well, this must be something that they really have done manually. You've got to be a bit careful, because I think very, very, very large companies, you can very easily mention someone who's halfway across the world that no one has, they don't know who this person is, and then it kind of backfires, right? So you want to do um, some due diligence on that, and you can do that stuff really easy. For example, in Clay, right, you can scan for the location of the prospect as well and match them with a conditional logic formula, and then do it that way. But it's an example of positive popping, right, in that email. Another example is, if you want to talk about again, competitors of who you're reaching out to, and again, making sure you've done that research to know, is this actually going to be a likely competitor? And there's lots of tools that you can use to do that, Disco, like Ocean, etc. And again, if you're a company that, particularly depending on the ICP, so if it's a founder, a CEO, or particularly if they're in marketing and sales, they're going to have a very, very strong idea of who the competitive market is. And so if you go in there and you mention that competitor, there's a good chance they might want to know, what are you doing? How are you helping our competitors? Maybe we're being left behind, or something to that effect, right? So pop theory, again, fundamentally, the concept is about understanding what it means for a prospect to see your message. And it begins with, what does your message look like? Not what does all of it say in the midst of the email or the message, right? Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about as well is personalization. And what's funny is I think personalization it's a wavy subject, because I think there's a lot of things that we've all collectively moved on from, and I don't know if that's entirely good, or maybe it is good, but it's just moved on again, which we'll talk about now. But so when we talk about personalization, firstly, what do we mean, right? Well, we mean basically saying something that is personal to the prospect or to the company that we're reaching out to. And I think everyone knows at this point that we're not talking about base level personalization like first name, right? That's almost a given at this point, right? But we're talking about maybe things that are a bit more interesting, like the job title or whatever that might be. We had a time where I think people the narrative or the big conversation was around moving away from irrelevant personalization to relevant personalization, or relevance at scale. I think that whilst this makes sense, again, coming back to competition and balance theory here, I think we have also landed in a bit of a time frame now where relevance is also pretty boring in most cases. Not in all cases, but in most cases. And I think that, and this is what I mentioned at the very start of the talk, and which I want to come to now, is that actually it's not so much relevance that's interesting, it's resonance. And so what I mean by that is, let's take an example of you reaching out to a head of sales, and what would be deemed as a relevant personalization is to mention the job title. And you'll probably see a lot of emails like this, or messages where it says something along the lines of, as a head of sales, and then it will mention some kind of relevant pain point, or whatever it is. Now, the problem fundamentally with relevance is that people are assuming that prospects care that you know things that they have known their entire lives, or as long as that thing has been true. They don't care that you know that they're the head of sales, or that you're mentioning that they're the head of sales. They don't care that you have seen their latest LinkedIn post and you have mentioned the title of the post. They actually don't care about any of this. They're, again, it used to be the case that this was much more interesting. We're just not there anymore. People are aware that you can scrape data. People are aware, even if you didn't scrape the data, okay, fine, you've gone on my LinkedIn and you've seen this and you're using it in the email. The question you need to ask yourself today when it comes to personalization is, why would they care about this point of personalization? And so what you want to do instead is be thinking about that personalization piece, and that can be a relevant data point in terms of intelligence. So whatever I'm going to use here, why or how can I intelligently link that to why I'm reaching out or why they should care about this message? So saying as a head of sales problem point, a good way to check and verify is, could I have made the same point without that personalization piece? And in that example, for example, you could have, right? But if you were to say something slightly different, if you were to say, well, let me find, let's use the colleague's name as a personalization point, again, as an example. If you were to find that colleague's, whoever it might be, and say, I saw that Jane in your department is currently working on this client. But I also saw that this client doesn't have X, Y, and Z, so you're probably finding it hard to do this thing that they were doing. We can make that easier with da, 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 da. In that example, the personalization points that we're taking out, so for them, it's fundamental to the point of the message, right? Fundamentally, what I'm saying is Jane is struggling. Jane is struggling not because she's Jane. She's struggling because I have seen that she's working with a client that doesn't have this particular whatever it is. So you must find this difficult because we have experience in this area. So we know why this kind of context is hard. And that's specifically what our product solves, X, Y, Z. But there's a fundamental difference there between relevant personalization and intelligent personalization. And I actually do think that relevant personalization, I don't want to keep saying things are dead because I think by the way, saying things are dead is dead. Okay, I'll say that. But I also think it's just, it's a simplistic way of brushing, I think, complex strategy under the carpet, right? But the point I'm making is that relevance for the sake of relevance is also just as benign as personalization for the sake of personalization. And we need to be thinking about, what are we saying that's actually resonating? And fundamental to this, by the way, if we think about it in the context of resonance rather than relevance, is that even irrelevant personalization can be really, really effective if it's done right. Because as people move on to these very, very, highly relevant emails where it's like, I've mentioned your job title and I mentioned, exactly what kind of company type you are, for a lot of people, it can be refreshing to get something that might not be relevant to the offer, but is a very nice decoration and makes the email feel more authentic. So if you email someone, I'll give you an example of where it's really bad. Like if you email someone and you say, I saw you went to this university, that's so cool. Are you interested in my web development services? But why is that bad? It's not because, this is the fundamental thing I think people don't think about, because they're thinking too structurally and they're not thinking about the strategy of why and the psychology of people. The reason why that's really bad is not because it's irrelevant. It's because it has been introduced to the prospect in a way which is clearly deceptive. That's why it pisses people off, because the prospect reads that and just kind of goes, oh, you're basically doing this so that I read and hear about your web development services, right? But a good way to think about it is, imagine the email was completely different and it was saying, hey, here is how we can help you, all this stuff about your offer only, pure relevant stuff. P.S. I saw you went to Southampton University. I was up in Southampton last week. Have you ever been to, and you name a restaurant type? Fundamentally, that is an entirely different proposition in that message. Not because suddenly this is irrelevant. It's still irrelevant that you went to, I know, and I went to the restaurant, but you have introduced it in a way where it's clearly not about trying to deceive you, because I began with why I'm really here. I'm putting that sentence in because, and this is what the whole point of why it can be an actual effective decoration from the prospect's point of view. You've already pitched me, so actually maybe you really did go up to Southampton and assuming you've got the matching correct and they were there, they might know the restaurant and be like, oh yeah, it's a cool restaurant. How did you find it? Da, da, da. But again, it's not about the data. It's about how you're strategically using the data in line with the psychology of the prospect. That's what matters. And I don't think anyone is, or rather, I should say, I think there's too much focus on the data and how to structure the data and how to automate the data. And so there's all these cool workflows and all this, if you like, enshrined guidelines, such as relevance, don't do irrelevant personalization, but it's just fundamentally not on the point of what matters, which is, am I introducing myself? Am I introducing whatever I'm writing here in a way which is going to resonate with this person? This links quite nicely, by the way, to trigger data, because I think it has the exact same problem, right? Which is, I think a lot of people will go straight to that trigger data. I saw you got fundraising. Fundraising, by the way, I find really funny, because if you think about hiring data, you can very easily make the argument that if you're hiring for this particular role, you probably need help with this thing, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment, but there's a logical argument there. But with fundraising, oftentimes what companies basically say is, you have money now. Do you want to give me some of your money? That's basically what you're saying in the email. And again, you've got to come back to, what is it that the prospect is experiencing from your message? And if their experience from your message is, you are telling me something I already know, why should they care? They like the fact that, because there used to be this trope of show them you know them, and I think there is still an element of that is important. But I think the way to think about that is not show them you've done homework. That's not important. It's show them you actually understand them. And those two things are fundamentally different. It's kind of if we go back to the example of the personalization, right, where we're saying, oh, as a head of sales, I saw you recently posted this LinkedIn post. Okay, I've done my homework, but that person isn't going to really feel like I understand them, compared to me saying, I saw that this colleague of yours is working with this client. We've worked with these kind of clients before, so we know that, and then like a really actual good paying data point. It's an entirely different proposition. So coming back to the trigger data, this is a similar problem that companies face, where they'll use something. Let's say hiring data is the most popular one to use, and they will make assumptions and lean on the fact that we're using trigger data, so this is going to be good. And invariably, it's usually not, unless there is a great messaging strategy underneath it. So I think with trigger data, the core things to be thinking about is, number one, are you using the trigger data basically as your strategy, which you shouldn't, right? And then what you should be asking yourself is, if I'm going to use this trigger data, what is the fundamentally great message that I'm giving along with this? One analogy I like to use is, if you see somebody, and by the way, it's really important also to note this, because often the trigger data assumption is actually just wrong. And we've had this with clients before, where you reach out to a company who's hiring for something, say, well, we saw you're hiring for this, so we thought you might need this service. And often they reply and say, well, we don't need your service. That's why we're hiring for someone, right? And it's like, well, and now you feel lost at sea, because you think, well, the data was supposed to lead to this assumption and so on. The analogy I use is, if you see someone hanging outside a restaurant, you might assume that they're hungry and they want to go and eat at this restaurant. But also that could be wrong. Maybe they are working nearby and they're taking a cigarette break. Maybe they are waiting for someone who they're going to meet, right? And they're trying to find the person, or their way, right? Now, the other side of this is, the data is correct. They're hanging outside the restaurant because they're hungry. But then what everyone does is they go up to that person and they say, I see that you're hungry because you're standing outside a restaurant. Here is a plate of cold noodles, right? And you're going to want this because I can see that you're hungry and I've told you that you're hungry. And in that analogy, it becomes really clear to people that, like, oh, I actually need to offer them something that's still really great. The fact that I have told them that they're hungry because I saw them outside a restaurant kind of means nothing, right? And so in the context of our outreach, that really is where trigger data lies. You could be incorrect, but let's assume you are correct about your assumption. Fundamentally unique in your competitive landscape. You still have to go up to that person and say, hey, I have the best steak in the country, or I cook the best pasta in the continent, whatever it is, right? You still got to offer them that for them to be like, yeah, screw this place, let's go with you. And most companies are spending all their time trying to find where people are from the data perspective, and then they rush the messaging part because they feel like that's the strategy. So with trigger data, I think it's really critical to use it as a list strategy, because once you find messaging that works really effectively, those triggers can accelerate, right, a working strategy. But it's really secondary, secondary to that. And I'll cover two more things, and then we can maybe have some questions. The thing that fundamentally what your outreach is going to be led by is going to be offers. And offers we can think about, I think, generally speaking, in two ways, or rather we should say three ways. And the first way is your core offer. So this is literally what you sell. So if you're a CRM SaaS, your core offer is your SaaS product, your subscription, where they sign up every month and they get to use your SaaS, whatever your core thing is. And that is usually something you can't change. You can't do anything about that. It's just what it is, right? The second thing we want to think about is compartmentalized offers. And compartmentalized offers is basically asking the question, here's what we offer. Are there things that we can take out from that and offer that as a one-time service, as a low threshold, low commitment, basically offer to bring them in to our core offer? Because in outbound, the landscape is very different. People often mirror what's happening on inbound and assume it will work on outbound, and it's just not the same thing. People don't know who you are. And often what you're doing with outbound is you're finding the right people, sure. But even when you find the right people, you have to still overcome the gap in trust, in rapport. And to do that, if you go in straight with a core offer that might be a longer term commitment or something that maybe looks more analogous to some of the competition out there, you're just not going to close deals outbound. So you want to have, the first idea is to have compartmentalized offers where you can offer something that's quick. Usually it's less expensive or it's less commitment than your core service or your core product. And that is something that people can do over a short period of time to get some value from you. And over that period of time, they learn more about you, they build rapport, and they're more likely to then sign up for those longer term plans with your core service. The particularly important at the top of funnel stage. So compartmentalized offers can be really good as a nurture strategy. They can also be good top funnel strategies as well, but particularly in the nurture strategy. But at the top of funnel, we really want to be thinking about great lead magnets that we can use to generate conversations. Again, a lot of people get very hasty with outreach and they assume like, I want to go from my list of contacts to like people who are knocking down the door with their money in their hand. And it's just not how it works. You have to have a process and have the strategy in place to generate conversations, to nurture leads, to be able to close effectively. And that's a process, right? And it starts, as I say, with starting and sparking conversations. And lead magnets are really effective there. I think the three tenets that I always talk about with lead magnets, and I encourage people to think about, because people get very boring and very lazy with lead magnets, which I understand because they can sometimes be tricky to put together. Don't just send out a PDF. You got to be creative. You got to come up with really interesting things. Again, come back to competitiveness. Are you actually offering something that's different? If you go in there with your latest playbook, how many similar things do you think that ICP is being offered? Chances are quite a lot, right? So the three things you want to think about is, number one, is it segmented? So can you offer them a lead magnet which is specifically useful for them, right? And sometimes if you are to use the PDF example, you might segment it by having a guide that's specifically for, L&D leads in Europe, right, at enterprise companies. But you can also have lead magnets that are inherently personalized. Tools can be kind of helpful in this potentially. So tools like Replit and Lovable and Bolt, where you can build mock-up interactive quizzes, interactive kind of calculators, whatever it might be relevant to you for your company, that the prospect can go and play with, right? things that they can, whatever it might be, that's going to be useful for them to find, maybe the ROI of something, maybe a quiz that helps them figure out the best way to do something. But it's very different, it's a bit more unique. So the first is segmenting it really well, or having it inherently personalized. And the second thing is for it to be actionable. And this is kind of why I think things like PDFs and playbooks get boring, is, something that the prospect can literally take away and plug into their own company and use is always really, really useful and interesting for prospects. A great example of what, like a year ago, we worked with a company doing Facebook ads, or I should say, selling Facebook ads via cold email to prospects. And initially, they wanted to run this sort of PDF idea of a guide on how to improve your Facebook ad results. And it did okay, didn't do terribly, but did all right. But then we came up with this lead magnet where we were able to actually use AI to spin up Facebook ad copy that was specifically tailored to the prospect's website. And it just like blew up overnight, like 10, 20 leads coming in a day. But again, why? Partly because it's personalized, but also because for the prospect, it's like you're going to get copy that you can literally just copy and paste into your ads right now today. And of course, fundamental to lead magnets is that they're free, right? So being actionable is really, really critical. And the final thing I'd say on the lead magnet side is for them to be surprising. This is more of a I would idea, but again, think back to competitiveness and balance theory. Are you offering something that the prospect is likely to see and be like, "Oh, I never get offered that"? If you can elicit that kind of feeling, you're much more likely to get people responding and saying, "Great, I want to test this out," and so on and so forth. Final thing I'll mention is about AZ testing. And I think it's funny because sometimes, we always, in the cold email agency world, we offer about things that we know work really well and things that we've found doing really well. And then we'll preface it with, but always got AZ test. And the reason we do that is because fundamentally it's true that your best way to crack outbound and deliver for your company sustainable pipeline is you have to find that winning message or those winning messages. And the fastest way to do that is to have a really robust AZ testing process in place where you're using a tool like LGM where you can go and test, run lots of different kinds of messages at the same time to find what's working effectively. And that doesn't mean running 3 or 4. It might mean running 10 or even 20 different variants. If you segment your list effectively, you might find that you have 7 or 8 different segments in the list, because you might cut it up not just by decision maker, but by company size and also by industry, and maybe also even by location or whatever it is. By pain is actually the best way to segment your list, really, right? Or by intelligent data. So as an example, if you are a company that is basically a friction switch kind of product, in other words, a company where you are offering something that your prospect likely has to switch out their alternative to use, the best way to segment your data is by competitors, right? So if your product is, I'm using the CRM example again, but just because it's in my mind right now, if you're a CRM and you're targeting larger companies, almost certainly they have a CRM in place. And so your best way to segment is to then say, let me use a tool like Built With, for example, to see what is the CRM we think that they're using. And then my entire AZ testing variants are going to be around what are the specific things that users of those competitors don't like that we can solve. That then leads naturally to a huge host of different AZ tests that you can run. And so you've got to get into the habit, not of trying to say, what's the perfect message? What's that one amazing message that we're going to put together and we really believe it's great because we've used all this trigger data, right? You don't want to do that. You want to think about using all of this kind of concepts around strategy. What are the 10 or the 15 best messages that we can come up across our list, and then go and run them at scale and find out, right, where people are biting onto, and then double down based on that. Hopefully that's been useful. There's a lot of other things that we cover, but I obviously don't want to go straight into the full hour and over. So yeah, I'll hand over back to you. And if there are any questions, I'm obviously more than happy to help with that.
Yeah, that's so helpful and useful. I have a few questions, and guys, if you have any question, also don't hesitate to ask in the chat. So I was I was listening to what you say about data-driven social proof, right?
Mm.
Um, do you have any advice to collect them? Is it internal analysis and performance and tracking, or do we need to ask testimonials to our client? What about testimonials like social proof? How to
Great
collect?
question. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, it begins with internal data. So it begins with um, having a record of, it doesn't have to be like on the website, right? But you've got a record somewhere of who have we helped, what kind of results did we get for them, and then what I would be thinking of doing once you've collected that data, and again, yeah, that could be the internal team just literally looking at your whatever it is your product is, or your service is, looking at where you store that data. Also, this is why it's really important, by the way, to track record your sales calls. So using tools like TLDV and so on. So you have a record of all this data and the conversations you had. Um, Once you collect that, and this is really, it's a manual exercise in that someone needs to lead this, but you can do it, for example, inside a tool like Clay, is to come up with how you can segment that social proof. So let's say you've got a case study with a company. Let's say it's an enterprise company in the US. So one way you can think about that is that it's an enterprise company in the US. But another way you can think about that is it's a company with 50 salespeople, or it's a company that is an enterprise construction company, or it's a North American company with offices in Europe, Asia. So you can segment and find different layers to all that social proof in many, many different ways for the same kind of case studies and same kind of results and social proof that you have. And what I would encourage people to do is to do that, map that out. You can do that in a Google sheet. It doesn't have to be that fancy, right? But then you can then use a tool like Clay to match that to your prospect list. So if you've then got that long prospect list, and that prospect list is companies that have, some of them have big sales teams, some of them have offices in Asia, some of them have this, some of that, you can then correlate that across, right? And then be able to provide not just the right case study to the right prospect, but also to frame the right case study in the right way to the right prospect. So in terms of collecting that data, it is very much about the team doing that internally, because that is obviously going to write your company's social proof, but then using a tool like Clay to sort of work with that data and manipulate it.
That's super interesting. And it's super linked to one question: can lead gen be fully automated and sustainable? And about that, yes, it
Yeah.
could be fully automated. That's what we do at La Growth Machine. We do have this integration with Clay, which is super great. Also to go in an advanced level of personalization. And I think also what I really like with tools like this is, like, as you say, you have a case study for one kind of company, and you also can do a campaign fully automated and always just look alike. And in La Growth Machine, we have this great feature, which is lookalike leads. You just can write it down your client, and then you have a similar list, and the message can be the exact case study that you did for one first
Yeah,
client.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, this is a great example of, but this is why tools like LGM, for example, are really helpful, because you can collect this data and you can use it more easily. But then, of course, you have to think about an intelligent messaging strategy. So even with lookalikes, right, you want to use that. Like, I think the time where we've just mentioned a lookalike and then been like, we help companies like this company, you can go further and say, well, here is something we know about you because we've worked with a similar company, right?
Mm,
And it's going that level deeper to resonate with the right person, as well. I think the question that I can see is asked in the chat about, can lead gen be fully automated, is, I think this comes back to the way that we're thinking about outbound. You got to go back to what this actually is. It is a marketplace. It's a finite marketplace with a lot of competition. As soon as everything is fully automatable, 100% automatable, right? Assuming the efficacy is 100%, like in a theoretical vacuum, every single message gets one meeting, right? Booked in the calendar. What would happen is everyone would do it. And if everyone does it, the messages become homogenous. And by definition, they become ineffective. So when you're asking the question, can it be fully automatable? You should be using these kind of tools because they will reduce your workload from 10 hours a week to 1 hour a week. But if you want to be successful over the long term and have sustainable pipeline coming in, you need to ask yourself, should I be outthinking the competition or not? And the answer is obviously yes, you should be. And that requires you as an expert in your field, whatever your product is and your solution is for your audience, to sit there and come up with that and think about that. And I'm not saying you can't use, like, for example, AI to help you brainstorm, right? But you've got to think about that in that competitive market. So use tools like LGM to automate a huge amount of that execution and the operation. But you can't operate the strategy. I mean, you can do that, but you can't do that consistently over time if you want to be better than your competition, which fundamentally you should be striving for if you want to get meetings, because it is a competitive sport by its
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
But
A sales automation tool without this messaging strategy and thought and understanding is empty, to be honest. We really need to use these tools like tools to help you collect data, the good data, but then the data, as one said, okay, they are hungry and they are restored, and this is true, but how
yeah,
can I be super accurate and personalized in a good way when I message them? So yeah. Also about message, do you have any thought about maybe sophisticated formats like voice on LinkedIn or I really like how new features in the growth machine, on LinkedIn DM, the big text. Now you can split it on because you just have like to write your message and any comma show up as a
yeah,
message. So this is the chat mode feature. We
yeah.
also have voice to like to be more to have more
Mhm.
notification, because one message is one notification, and also to stand out at in the inbox. What do you think about that?
I'm going to be really annoying here. And I'm going to say you've got to AZ test. But I'll tell you why I'm saying that, which is maybe actually a helpful way to think about this, is I think when we think about structure, even though there are certain guidelines, write really short or this kind of stuff and what's working now and what isn't working, from my experience, it really does differ depending on who you're reaching out to, and like we've tested this before, where for certain markets they love voice messages, they love it, and then other just certain kinds of people just don't. They don't listen to it. They just never press play and listen to the whole thing. Equally with emails, by the way. Like we've had lots. I've had lots of examples. I know other agencies have had similar ones where we've run like really quippy, short emails that follow all the perfect guidelines on brevity, and then like a long, like really boring style email, and the long one kills the other one. And it's just because ICPs are different. Maybe you have for that particular client or your company. Again, think about balance theory, guys, right? Like have a specific thing that just shows better in a longer thing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you absolutely should AZ test it and think about, for what we're selling here and who our market is, maybe voice messages are going to be more effective than a written message. So I like it as part of, strategically testing to find the winning message. I think you've got to just go and check that for your particular client. I think similar to even LinkedIn as well and email, there are just certain places where different channels work better. Like even certain markets, LinkedIn works better than email, and then email works better than LinkedIn, right? So I think just test it. That's what I would say. But it can be really effective. I know some people who have done voice message and you know, I don't want to go into reply rates, but like, but they're really high, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but it just doesn't mean it's going to do that for every single type and, and campaign.
Great, thanks. Question: what's your favorite strategy framework for building campaign? How do you think of constructing a campaign? I have to say that it's really depending on what you are aiming for. What is your strategy? What is your goal? We do have different sequence depending of your goal. It's a strategy, a playbook library. I just give you the notion, but
Yeah.
yeah, you have few questions to ask yourself before answering that, I think. One, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really hard to just say off the bat this is the strategy because inherently you have, and this is what I mean by balance theory, right? The strategy that works is going to be the one that depends on who your market is and what kind of assets you have. Maybe you've got no social proof, right?
Yeah,
Or maybe you can't think of any good lead magnets. Like depending on your answers to those kinds of things, the strategy might be completely different. So I think the first, to answer the question maybe in a simpler way, balance theory is how everything begins for us.
yeah, exactly.
First, yeah, understanding the market, understanding you, and then
And
going from there.
if it's more about, oh, it's too difficult to build from scratch because I don't have the technical the technical capabilities, you do have some catalog and playbooks and pre-built sequences. We do have a lot in La Grosse Machine, and we just took the best from our user. And this one, for
Yeah,
example, has a little most used label. So yeah, maybe if it's about it's too much for me to build from scratch, you do have a different
yeah,
option. The playbook library I gave you, it's you also have duplicate campaign button. So if you find in my playbook library one that match your objectives, you can just duplicate it. See, it's a copy paste lead magnet. So yeah, very
yeah,
explainable.
yeah. You're right. I agree as well. I think particularly for companies that are starting out with this and trying to just figure out how do I get that ball rolling, definitely follow the LGM. LGM has these kind of structures to help you get off the mark and again use them to test different
Yeah,
messages. I think is a really really great way to sort of begin that process. And then as you kind of progress, you can then get a bit more sophisticated with it and start thinking about that kind of other stuff in a more granular way. But this is a great way, I think, to begin as well, and just get loads of tests out there, right, and find out how the market is responding. Because ultimately, I think as well, people they like to feel as though they can somehow figure out what's going to be good before, and you don't. The market will tell you,
yeah.
right? The market will tell you what's good and what's bad. Um, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Last question. What are the most modern tools in the stack and how do they get used? Especially Clay or others. About that, I will say that it depends of different things. It depends of your are you alone using that? Are you advanced or more like a newbie? And also, what do you want to do? Like depending on the features you are interested in. Instantly is super great for mass mailing. Clay is super great for doing everything, like from the personalization to the data collecting. LGM is great for multi-channel outbound
Yeah.
sequence, and that's why Clay and La Grosse Machine has an integration. So yeah, it depends really about what time you want to to give to these tools, what is your budget, and what
Yeah.
features you need.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you want to do a lot of the data work, some of that we talk about social proof matching, personalization, scale. I think Clay is really that fundamental tool to do that in. There are some other ones out there as well that you can look at. I think Clay obviously is sort of leading the charge in that space. And then yeah, as Eloise says, like I think as you mentioned as well, there's a good integration between LGM and Clay that you can use to then feed that into a multi-channel approach, right? So there's all those kind of ways that you can do that. But again, I wouldn't start necessarily with the tech stack being like the thing that's going to lead the thing. I would think more about how do I get messages out there that I think are good as quickly as possible, right? And then let that feedback into you, particularly because I can't tell you how many companies message me and they say, hey, we're doing outreach, it's not working, we're using all the tools, can you help us? And they'll show me Clay workflows that are really, really complex with all these kinds of things going on, and they're not getting any pipeline. And I'm like, can you show me your message? And they show me, and I'm like, right. And by the way, like I say, Clay is amazing. I use it all the time, but it's not about using the most complex stuff. It's about understanding fundamentally why am I doing what I'm doing. So, yeah, I think there's lots out there that you can have a look at, but begin with strategy. Begin with who is my ICP? How are we
Segmentation,
different?
yeah. Also,
Exactly.
be careful about volume. Really, like spray and pray is really dead. Sorry, I have to say dead, because yeah, this is now another ecosystem. Outbound changed, and I think you can't go to you can't choose a stack just because they promise you more volume to send more emails, etc.
No, sure, yeah. I'll challenge that slightly by saying I think that it's really important for companies not to confuse spray and pray with volume. But I think the important part is understanding why are you doing what you're doing? So if you're doing a larger volume, is it because you are AZ testing more messages? Is it because you found a message and you're segmenting that across your ICP list and so on, and you can then bulk that out how you do that? But yeah, obviously you don't want to just, again, and that comes back to the idea as well of not deciding your strategy based on things like, I have this arbitrary idea if I have to send this many messages or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah. Just to finish the question, what are those fundamentals? And give an example situation, then a strategy. For example, the fundamentals, I just wrote it down on the chat. Question like, is it my market crowded? How unique is my service product? Do you have a unique social proofs? What is my ICP that I'm segmenting? And then your strategy can be, to be honest, super
Yeah.
simple, I think. It could be great to use multi-channel because maybe you multiply the chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
And to answer the second question there about the volume and the ratio, you've got to go and you've got to, this is something you can do in Clay, right? You've got to go and understand the composition of your TAM. So literally impossible for anyone to answer this question without knowing your TAM. So if your TAM is 5,000 people, you can only send so many messages per winning message. If your TAM is 200,000 people, that number is going to be completely different. So what you need to do is, and you don't have to begin necessarily because if you don't have the budget for going through your entire TAM at the start, that's fine. But you need to at least get an understanding of what does my TAM look like in a segmented way. So not in a generalized way, like how many recruiting companies are there in the world, but how many recruiting companies are there of the employee size that we can offer this for versus this, etc. Then you can the answer will actually then become very obvious to you because you'll look at your AZ testing and you'll figure out what the data is telling you. So the data might tell you that we get a meeting for every 500 emails we send, hypothetically, right? And let's say your TAM is 10,000 people, or whatever. You can then do the math and figure out what you need to send every month to get what kind of meeting volume. And then how do we scale up? Well, we can add more segments, we can, et cetera, et cetera. But the answer to those questions in terms of this, I think this person might be interested in those specific numbers. That's going to be borne out by your specific market, looking at the TAM, and then looking at the data from the AZ test that you're running. They said the ratio. I mean, not ratio of the Do you, if you mean the ratio of the messages sent to how many people are coming back interested, again, like that will depend on your offer, your social proof. If you have really bad social proof and a bad offer and a bad lead magnet, it's going to be a lot of messages to get an interested response. If you're targeting enterprise, which is much harder to crack, you're probably going to have to send out more messages to get interested response and so on, right? So again, you've got to let that data, the AZ testing, tell you where those kind of benchmarks lie for your particular company and what you're doing. I hope that's helpful there.
Hmm. So we are running out of time. If
Yes,
there is more question, I think people can reach out to you on LinkedIn, right, Mohan?
absolutely. Yeah.
And also, as I said, if you want to test a simple tool and all-in-one tool to help you gain time, but never doing the messaging strategy at your place, use like Gross Machine 1 month for free instead of 14 days. It's a special link for this webinar, right? And if you have any question about strategy, outbound strategy, messaging, etc., we also have the playground, which is a community for sales and go to market. You can just look at this one. There is all the webinars recordings there, also playbooks, resources, etc. And yes, I think that's all. Thank you
Super.
very much,
Yeah.
Glenn. It was super, super useful, super
Thank you for having.
insightful.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, guys,
Bye,
for the
everyone.
question, and see you next week for another one. No, it's even after tomorrow. I have another one just dedicated to solopreneurs and how they can use outbound, smart outbound as solopreneur, which is like a real concrete use case. Thank you
Brilliant.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.